Welcome everyone back to weekly weather updates, and in today's video and at the latest from the live radar, from the latest UKV, have the precipitation and the temperature over the next 5 days, and no surprise, we've got no changes coming up throughout this next week or so as we continue to see this high pressure system sat right over the top of us. Temperatures around average or slightly above average, a little chill in the air but nothing too remarkable, and plenty of cloud, although there will be some breaks in the sun, especially further inland. So nothing really changing in the next week. It's beyond that though where we have got some real intrigue. Continue to see conflicting runs both from the GFS GM today and the ECMWF, as we do see some runs continue to push that blocking northwards, potentially turning us cooler, maybe even colder. Other runs having that blocking moving even further westwards, allowing lower pressure to undercut that, and actually brings a cooler and more unsettled spell there towards the end of October. So we've got a lot of different changes within the runs in towards the sort of longer term time frames. That's what we're going to really focus on in this video, because as I said, over the next kind of 5 to 7 days, we're not expecting any changes at all. So do remember, if you enjoy the video, do like and subscribe. So once again, if we start on the live radar, really not much going on. Calling this a little bit later on this Saturday evening around 8:20. Really no activity today, no activity over the past few days in terms of precipitation, and not expecting much over the next week either. Can see a few bits and bobs of drizzle across Scotland, and we could see a few bits and bobs of drizzle across eastern England over the next few days. But apart from that, it is bone dry, and if we do put on the temperatures, you can see that it is fairly mild in most spots, but we've got a bit thicker cloud. We're still seeing a little bit of a chill there, temperatures down into the mid to high single digits, so falling away quite a lot overnight, but by day still in the mid to high teens, which isn't too bad for mid-October. Now, if you look at the latest UKV, again, we can skim through this really quickly. As all you can see is quite a bit of cloud, a few bits and bobs of blues, where we have got some slight precipitation, and especially into next working week down the east coast, we could see some showers as we see a bit of a northeasterly wind, but really not much changing at all in the next 5 days. So really small amount of activity, and it looks like it's going to be very, very quiet this next 5-6 days. Pretty unusual for middle of autumn. This is the time of year when we kind of expect the jet stream to really be ramping up. It's more of a spring or summer-like pattern, this, with stationary high pressure over the top of us, or even a little bit of a winter pattern. Not so much in recent years have we seen these big dry and cold spells, but definitely has been around in the past. We can see sort of significant fog as well, as this sort of pattern would develop into that, especially during the winter months. So yeah, really unusual to be seeing this in mid-autumn, especially after only 7-8 days ago we had Storm Amy moving through. So yeah, really unusual pattern to be this kind of persistent, but we've got another 5 days at least, maybe even up towards 7 or 8 days before we do look likely now to see a change. Now, if you look at the max temperatures, as I said, pretty chilly overnight, temperatures around the mid-single digits, but by day still up towards the mid-teens, 15 to 17 degrees. Into Monday, not quite as cold overnight, with some thicker cloud getting dragged in off the North Sea, and temperatures once again maybe 17, 18 or even 19. Into Tuesday, once again temperatures pretty mild in the far south, cooler in the north, and by the afternoon once again 16 to 17. Wednesday, again up towards their mid-teens, maybe more low teens further northwards and eastwards with the cloud and a bit of rain, and the same could be said for Thursday. So again, not much going on this week. Some fluctuations in the temperatures, but we're not expecting too much going on at all, and going to be another very, very quiet working week before things, as I said, could change around the 18th, 19th, 20th of October, in around a week to maybe 10 days time. So if you move over to the GFS, you can see what is causing this dry, settled and really stationary pattern, this big blocking high that we've been warning about for a couple of weeks now, this developing, and you can see it's now firmly in place. It's been firmly in place for the past few days, and it will be firmly in place for the next 5, 6, 7 days. You can see it goes nowhere as we head into next week. It does start to strain late next week, and that could allow some slight northeasterly winds to appear, but it's really next weekend and beyond we start to see low pressure moving through around the 18th, 19th, 20th October. Look at this, low pressure breaks through and it does look unsettled once again. Now the block doesn't dissipate, it just moves around. You can kind of see a bit goes to the northeast, an Atlantic ridge out towards northeast Canada, and it's a very mixed up and undulating pattern there, up and down pattern developing. So yeah, really unsure exactly what this was entail. This GFS run goes pretty unsettled, but it's very close to being still pretty dry, potentially even cold if we end up on the eastern side of one of these ridges. So really sort of convoluted GFS pattern today, seeing a bit of everything, a bit of cooler, colder air at times, milder, wet and windy at times, and more of an eclectic mix that you'd expect more in line with sort of autumn time. But of course, with this Atlantic blocking, with these Atlantic ridges still there, you can't rule out quite a sudden shift towards something a little bit different there. These sort of blocking patterns normally give the extremes a more likely chance of occurring. So, as I've been talking about quite a lot, definitely a risk of it going much colder, but also the risk of if we end up on the western side of one of these blocks, we could actually see a strong south or southwesterly, so it could actually go very mild as well. We need to keep a very close eye on that. Now, if you look at the latest GM, we have got it back, but for some reason, it's not loading the first 5 days of the run, but we can see it from 132 hours onwards, and anyway, that's the point at which we actually start to see some uncertainty. So again, very similar to the GFS, with the Atlantic slowly breaking through around the 19th, 20th, and actually goes really unsettled here out towards day 10. And you can see the reason for that is the block heads towards northeast Canada and Greenland, and this allows a big northerly wind to push in. Now, very cold air actually goes to our west. This is more west-based and negative NAO. This is kind of a pattern that can develop during winter that can ruin cold chances. All of the sort of high-level signals are all for something very cold, but you can see here it doesn't occur. Now, the reason for that is because this is a west-based NAO, all of that cold air pulls out in the North Atlantic, not towards northwest Europe. So this would be an annoying chart if we were looking for snow in the winter, but in mid-October it wouldn't develop anything that cold, -5 ice zones close by, but what it would do in this pattern is really power up these low-pressure systems, because you see this very cold air streaming into the north side of the jet stream of these low pressure systems, very mild warm air drifting into the south side, 20 to even 25 degree temperature clash there across the Atlantic, and it's these lows that are spinning up, and that could allow the jet stream to really power up. You can see it through the different levels along that boundary, and you can see it's this low here that could develop into a real beast if we were able to see the next couple of days. So that is very interesting from the GEM. Still very similar with the blocking pattern further out to our west, but it's allowing this trough to develop in the North Atlantic, and it does send the sort of areas of low pressure our way that could develop into some really mean storm systems. So it goes from very blocked, dry, and really not much going on to very stormy in the matter of only a few days. So that's what can happen. As I said, this really does amplify the extremes in these scenarios. And if we finish by looking at the latest ECMWF, again, that high firmly over the top of us gets pushed away late next week, and again goes a little bit more Atlantic driven, but we do have a bit of a west-based NAO, but we also still have high pressure over the top of us, and this kind of splits these lows. And it gives us really kind of obscure pattern. We've got a bit of a block towards Iceland, but it's not really controlling or dictating the North Atlantic. Still a big low just to our west, but also some deeper lows towards Scandinavia that look like they want to move southwards. And if you do look at the upper air temperatures, that's kind of what that flow is doing, heading into Scandinavia and maybe Northern Europe. And it's this battle with this low to our west, this low to our east and northeast, and there's a little high sat towards Iceland and Greenland, sort of dividing the boundary between this warm sector and this cold sector. And what happens to that could dictate where we go from here. If it kind of dissipates away, you'd expect the Atlantic to break through. We stay in the mild air and go even milder. But if it kind of consolidates, then we could see this northerly drift in, and it could even turn much colder. So as I just said, really does amplify the extremes when we see these sort of patterns developing with blocking heading northwards. Could see very cold conditions, could see very mild conditions, and because it is mid-autumn, cold air is starting to generate to our north, but we still have the legacy of summer to our south, and it can allow these big temperature clashes. It's what fuels big storm systems this time of year, and that's what we saw from the GEM. In this scenario, though, it could actually allow us to develop into a much colder pattern, or maybe could turn us into that stormier, unsettled pattern. Now, if we look at the latest ensembles, you can see what they think. Generally around average or above average over the next week, but bone dry. Around the 19th, that's where the precipitation picks up, and you can see very undulating temperatures, with pretty constant moderate to high precipitation. So what that means is a lot of the runs do bring low pressure back but very uncertain about the exact upper air temperatures that we're going to see. Is it going to be cold? Is it going to be 0 degree isotherm or lower? Or is it going to be average around the 5 degree isotherm? Or is it going to be fairly mild around the 10 degree isotherm? You can't see too many of each extreme. There aren't too many very cold runs or too many very mild runs, but that could be something that crops up closer to the time. But definitely continuing uncertainty in terms of the temperatures and the upper air temperatures. But the one thing that's starting to consolidate within the longer range charts is definitely a return to precipitation, perhaps a return to more unsettled conditions. But whether it's a colder unsettled pattern or whether it's a milder unsettled pattern will all depend on where that block goes across the North Atlantic, Greenland, Northeast Canada, even Scandinavia. Some runs are showing. Where does it go? That will decide the air mass we see. But all runs are starting to agree, though, low pressure will undercut it or at least move towards us. So an unsettled pattern is definitely favoured. You can see from the sea level pressure a big drop coming around the 18th, 19th. So as I said, in about 7 days' time is when we're expecting a change to occur. Dew points, very stationary over the next week. And then you can see a massive deviation. Some milder dew points, some colder dew points. Atlantic, colder Arctic air masses colliding. Again, could be very interesting watch. And finally, if we compare to the ECM WF ensembles, if we do put on the upper air temperatures from the midnight run, again, very similar, drop coming later on next week and then precipitation picking up and then again undulating upper air temperatures. Perhaps not quite as confident with the precipitation, given there's 50 ensemble members here. There's not as much precipitation as we'd expect if it was saw the exact same thing as the GFS. But nonetheless, a pickup. And you can see the upper air temperatures are perhaps a little bit colder, but still a little bit all over the place, so still not quite sure. So definitely now kind of eyeing in a change in around 7-8 days' time. That's where we're pretty sure now we are going to see a return to something more autumnal, whether it's a colder unsettled pattern, a milder unsettled pattern, or somewhere in between, or flipping between the two. That is what we've got to determine over the coming days. So anyway, thanks for watching. Make sure you enjoy the dry and settled weather we have at the moment, as I suspect this won't be lasting much longer. It's the next 7 days, as I said, but after that, might not see much at all until next spring. You never know what could occur. Could see the jet stream really power up, or we could see a real eclectic mix towards the end of the year. Again, that's something we'll look at later on this working week. But so thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you again for another video soon.